that we may have, and we have on our agenda testimony from Robert V. Brannon, who is the chairperson of the Ward 5 Leadership Council Public Safety Committee. Mr. Brannon, would you take to the witness table? And we will receive your testimony. And thank you for being here. And you may start when you're ready, sir.
Greetings and salutations. I am Robert Vincent Branham, President Emeritus of the DC Federation of Civic Associations, a former advisory neighborhood commissioner, chairman of the Ward 5 Leadership Council Public Safety Committee, and a military service-connected disabled veteran. I support the nominations of Mr. Lafayette Barnes to the Office of Employee Appeals, Mr. Gregory McCarthy, and Mr. Michael Wakefield to the DC Board of Elections. And since I met this gentleman this morning, I will support the nomination of Mr. Lee Clark. I support these nominations because each has demonstrated competence, compassion, and a commitment to service. Let me say for the record, recent events involving the DC Office of Campaign Finance show there is a need for new and expanded leadership regarding DC elections, from oversight of citywide elections to deciding the efficacy of proposed initiatives, deciding referenda and recalls. A change is needed. It is troubling to see certain members of this council surrender respect for integrity because an ally has fallen prey to misconduct and fallen short on ethical public service. Another word would be hypocrisy. Voters put their political faith in public servants with the trust they will do the right thing for the people. 3 days from today, July 4th, America will celebrate 250 years as a free America, overshadowing the evidence DC is not fully free. When DC residents look around them, they see dishonor, despair, and disappointment because of lack of full voting representation. There is another word which comes to mind. That word is betrayal. For too long, DC has been betrayed by people who shout freedom, equality, fairness, justice, and democracy. There are people and organizations using words like freedom, justice, equality, fair, and truth in their names in rally speeches, but will refuse to recognize, include, and respect the men and women who sacrifice to serve and to protect their collective rights of freedom for all. Some years ago, on January 21, I was born in Freedom's Hospital. On many occasions, I can recall my mother telling me I was free. I believed her. Yesterday, the Supreme Court validated my birthright citizenship. On July 4th, people across this city and nation will be able to celebrate the spirit of freedom through the strength of the vote because a veteran, including DC veterans, sacrificed, protected, and defended the American Constitution. Many demands to fight, yet will not honor those who did and say thank you for your service. Jesus was not only betrayed by Judas, but also by Simon Peter. The people of DC are not only being betrayed by self-serving politicians and self-righteous community groups shouting freedom, justice, equality, fairness, and truth, but also by certain disciples in local media preaching love for a free press, yet will mute certain community advocates because they will not kneel and be silent to the professional injustice in their midst. Hear me, Washington Post, Washington Times, Washington City Paper, 51st News, CityCast, Alex Comer, Connie Deal, Martin Astamule, Mark Seagraves, Matt Murray, Jenny Gathright, and Megan Flynn. Some may say, what does this have to do with the nominations of Mr. Clark, Mr. Barnes, Mr. McCarthy, and Mr. Wakefield? Hear this as I close with these words from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We must see now that the evils of racism and economic exploitation are tied together. Elections matter, voting matters. The people of DC matter. Racists and bigots understand the power of the vote and are uniting to block Black people from voting. Regardless of your thoughts and views about military service, remember it was a veteran who secured your rights and freedom. Despite all the fanfare by those who won in the past primary election and by those who report election news, the voter turnout was embarrassingly low. Nearly 80% of eligible voters did not vote. It is my hope and my expectations Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Wakefield will be able to guide the board to inspire greater voter turnout. While the Board of Elections is not on the ballot, the decisions it makes reflect to its mission and integrity, and those of its members. God bless the District of Columbia, and I thank you. And one final note, on Saturday, October 24, 2026, the DC Federation of Civic Associations is hosting its 105th anniversary and 93rd annual awards celebration and scholarship luncheon. I am inviting Holland at Night, the Washington Nationals, and the DC Board of Elections to become sponsors and support this community service work of the Federation. The website is www.dcfca.org.
Thank you, Mr. Brannon, for your testimony. Thank you so much. Now I will get back to the script and continue. For our first panel of nominees that we have before us, it's the nomination of Mr. Lee Clark to the Public Employee Relations Board. And the second is Mr. Lafayette Barnes to the Board of the Office of Employee Appeals. To follow, we'll have a second panel to consider the nominations of Mr. Gregory McCarthy and Mr. Michael Wakefield to the District of Columbia Board of Elections. So as Mr. Brennan is exiting the witness table, okay. All right, this is what freedom is about. You get help by all of us. That's the way it should be. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to invite Mr. Clark and Mr. Barnes to join us at the witness table, and we will accept their testimony. And let me outline the work of the agencies to which they have been appointed and provide you a little background on their nomination. Mr. Lee Clark is before us for an appointment to the Public Employee Relations Board. This board, commonly referred to as PERB, is governed by a 5-member board and adjudicates unfair labor practice complaints, considers appeals of grievance, arbitration awards, and investigates standards of conduct complaints. Mr. Clark is being considered for this appointment, filling a seat formerly held by Ann Hoffman for a term that will end December 12, 2028. Mr. Clark is a Ward 6 resident, an alumnus of Morehouse College and St. John's University. He is currently a senior attorney at the United States Government Accountability Office and possesses federal and local experience in labor law and labor relations. In the federal sector, Mr. Clark has worked as an attorney for the National Labor Relations Board and the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and is the recipient of the Federal Service Bronze Medal for exemplary service. With the district government, Mr. Lee, Mr. Clark worked for the Office of Labor Relations and Collective Bargaining, and of course, the District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority. And his nomination is deemed disapproved on November 24, 2026, unless a resolution of approval is introduced. And so that's why we're here today, to entertain your nomination. We also have with us at the table Mr. Lafayette Bonds, who is appointed to the board of the Office of Employee Appeals. It's commonly referred to OEA, and it consists of a 5-member board. It's an independent administrative adjudicatory agency that processes appeals filed by the district government's workforce. Employees may file appeals for one, being removed because of adverse action for cause, placed on enforced leave, suspended for 10 days or more, or subjected to a reduction in force, or affected by a safety-sensitive designation. Mr. Barnes is being considered for this appointment to the Office of Employee Appeals Board, replacing the Honorable Arrington Dixon for the remainder of an unexpired term that will end on April 6, 2028. Mr. Barnes is a Ward 8 resident and an alumnus of LaSalle University and Georgetown University. He is president and CEO of Zulu Global Enterprise, with over 20 years of public administration experience. He has also served within the government ranks as a senior executive agency director, working on organizational grant and resource management under 4 mayors in the District of Columbia, including Mayors Anthony Williams, Adrian Fenty, Vincent Gray, and of course, Muriel Bowser. So I'm looking forward to conversations with these excellent nominees. And so now I'll turn and ask my staff, do we have any? Okay, so we're going to solo. We don't have any other members of the committee on at this time. And we will now ask you if you will raise your right hand so I can swear you in. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony that you present us with today to be truthful and complete?
I do.
Thank you very much. And I will start with you, Mr. Clark, if you have a statement that you would like to make. You're on. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Bonds, and good afternoon. My name is Lee Wesley Clark, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I also want to thank Mayor Muriel Bowser for nominating me for a position on the District of Columbia Public Employee Relations Board, the DC PERB. I am honored to be considered for this important position, which plays a vital role in ensuring fair, balanced, and lawful labor relations within the district government. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve the citizens of the District of Columbia. I am a graduate of Morehouse College, where I received my Bachelor of Arts in Political Science in 1988. I received my Juris Doctorate from St. John's University School of Law in 1995. As I sit here before you today, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with Professor Janet Mailson Spencer one day after constitutional law class. Professor Spencer and I would regularly talk after class, and we developed a good rapport. During one of our post-class conversations, she asked me what kind of law I wanted to practice, and I enthusiastically said to her, sports law. I said, I want to be a sports agent. And she looked back at me with a face that evinced what I can best describe as disappointment. She proceeded to say that the application of the person that she recommended for admission to this school has a great deal of experience in helping people, particularly his work for Councilmember Reverend Wendell Foster, the first African-American elected to the City Council of New York, in the poorest councilmanic district in New York City. She said the person whose application she recommended said they wanted to use this education to help people. Now, after expressing my surprise that she was on the admissions committee and remembered my application, I had to admit she was right. She said, next semester I am teaching labor law, and I would like you to consider taking that class. Unions fight for workers' rights in the workplace. Because I enjoyed constitutional law with Professor Spencer, I took labor law without hesitation. In essence, that conversation changed my life. And it is because of that conversation I am here today. I fell in love with labor law and found my passion. In the summer after my second year at St. John's, I interned with Region 2 of the National Labor Relations Board, investigating unfair labor practice charges under the National Labor Relations Act. My first position after law school was working for the first union of attending physicians in the United States, Doctors' Council. At Doctors' Council, I negotiated contracts covering both compensation and working conditions with the Metropolitan Transit Authority of New York City, several private medical companies with staffed attending physicians who worked at the hospitals within the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation system, and a private dental office. In June of 2000, I moved from the Bronx to our nation's capital to work for the Mayor's Office of Labor Relations and Collective Bargaining. It is here where I became familiar with the role that DC PERB plays within the DC government. Following a year with OLRCB, I worked with what was then called the District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority, where I practiced in front of the Public Employee Relations Board, defending DC WASA against allegations of violations of the DC labor statute. Since 2004, I have been employed as an attorney with 3 different agencies in the federal government, as an attorney advisor in labor and employee relations at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, as the agency labor officer at the NLRB, and I'm currently employed as a senior attorney at the United States Government Accountability Office, better known as GAO. I was hired by GAO in 2010 to be counsel to the management bargaining team negotiating GAO's inaugural collective bargaining agreement and to provide legal support for GAO's Labor Management Relations Office. At this point in my career, I've had the opportunity to practice labor law in the public sector, private sector, on a state level in DC, and on the federal level in both the executive and legislative branches. This experience has given me a very strong foundation in labor law. Because I've been on both sides of the table, I focus on integrity, fairness, consistency, and respect for the role of both labor and management in providing needed services to the public. This experience has also taught me that the relationship that people have with their employer is one of the most important relationships that they have in their lives. In no particular order, if you have a faith walk, there's the relationship that you have with the God you worship. There is also the relationship one has with their family. And if you work for somebody else or you employ people that work for you, there's the relationship that the employer or the employees have with their respective employer or employees. Depending upon how one prioritizes work, this may be the most important relationship you have. During my time working for Doctors' Council in New York and my time representing management during my employment with DC government, I came to appreciate that the goal of the parties, i.e., the city employees and those that manage them, was to provide efficient and effective services to the public. However, in effort to serve citizens, sometimes labor and management have disagreements over working conditions and compensation. I've been on both sides of the dispute, representing labor and management. And because I practiced in front of the PERB, I'm fully cognizant of the important role that PERB plays in the administration of the Comprehensive Merit Personnel Act, resolving labor disputes, determining appropriate units for collective bargaining, the negotiability of proposed language, and safeguarding the rights of both labor and management. With respect to resolving labor disputes, what I appreciate most is a well-reasoned, legally sound decision. These decisions provide teachable moments for my clients. They either affirm the correctness of their understanding of the agreement or the law, or they allowed me to instruct them so my client could learn from their mistake. If confirmed, I will approach this position with impartiality, diligence, and an abiding respect for the rule of law. If confirmed, I would use my experience to render well-reasoned, legally sound decisions that will hopefully resolve disputes in a manner that allows agencies and employees to move forward in providing much-needed services to the citizens of the District of Columbia in a way that promotes government effectiveness and efficiency. I recognize that the decisions of the board have concrete and lasting impacts on employees, agencies, and ultimately the residents of the districts they serve. If confirmed, I commit to ensuring that every matter brought before the board is evaluated thoughtfully on the facts, the law, and established precedent. Finally, because I value collaboration and thoughtful deliberation, if confirmed, I will strive to contribute constructively to the board's discussions and decisions. Thank you again for considering my nomination. I am prepared to serve with integrity and fairness. I humbly and respectfully ask for your support, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. I appreciate your getting your testimony. I do have just a couple of questions, but let me start with let us get Mr. Barnes's testimony because they are very similar since you're working with the same population. So, Mr. Barnes, we'll take your testimony now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, at-large council member and chairperson of the DC Committee on Administration and Law. My name is Lafayette Barnes, a longtime Ward 8 resident who retired from the government in 2017 after nearly 20 years as the appointed director of the Office of Partnerships and Grant Services in the Executive Office of the Mayor by Mayors Williams, Fenty, Gray, and Bowser. I am honored to present my written testimony before the committee, Public Roundtable, in support of my nomination by Mayor Muriel Bowser to serve on the board of the DC Office of Employee Appeals, OEA. During my tenure with the Executive Office of the Mayor, I have had the privilege and responsibility to develop and direct the district's agency-wide grant-making and donation solicitation procedures, publish the required reports, and present my findings before the appropriate DC City Council committee. I was also responsible for supervising the Office of Partnerships and Grant Services, diverse staff, and volunteers to support their professional development, as well as the office's annual performance goals. My duties as the Office of Partnerships and Grant Services Director included directing the Executive Office of the Mayor's policies, procedures, rules of conduct, and related ethics training, for all district agency donation and grant managers to uphold the maximum compliance standards regarding these agency-wide practices. Additionally, I met as needed with the appropriate office employees, EOM or Executive Office of the Mayor personnel, government general counsel staff to discuss employee-related issues, to resolve their concerns in a confidential, equitable, and timely manner. In my addition to the work in the mayor's office, I also served for about 5 years as a board member and most recently the past board chairman of the United Planning Organization, UPO. UPO is a 60-year plus DC-based nonprofit that provides core services to mostly low-income residents in areas of early learning, career training and placement, and housing. During my tenure with UPO, I had the opportunity to advise its executive committee on several internal and sensitive employee-related matters. I also would like to state that I'm a proud U.S. Army veteran. Thus, I am confident that my past experiences with the Executive Office of the Mayor and the United Planning Organization, as well as my commitment to resolve employee-related issues in a confidential, equitable, and timely manner, will be an asset to the district's Office of Employee Appeals. This concludes my written testimony. I am available to answer additional questions that members of the Committee on Executive Administration and Labor and its public roundtable, or you might have. I look forward to your consideration and support of my nomination to serve on the district's Office of Employee uh, Board. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee, members of today's roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you also for your testimony. I'd like to start by just, if you could, just each of you give me, what is your understanding of the role that you will assume as a member of the board to which you're nominated?
Okay,
Mr.
I'll
Bond,
start.
you,
Thank you very much.
okay.
From my understanding, after talking to several people who have served on the board, is to provide advice to the Office of Employee Appeals. And to do that in a way where we look at all of the facts, discuss the issues that are pertinent to these particular cases, and then make a recommendation, again, to the office. So in short, that's sort of my understanding of what the basic principles are or responsibilities are for this role.
All right. Mr. Clark?
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you,
Yes.
sir.
My understanding is, as a member of the Public Employee Relations Board, I will be deciding labor cases that are disputes between DC government agencies and unions that represent them within the DC government. So it might be unfair labor practice charges. There also may be questions regarding the negotiability of particular proposals that occur during the course of collective bargaining, and also dealing with arbitrations, appeals for grievances that they believe may be where the decision might be a violation of the law, rule, or public policy. In addition to that, there's also, I don't know how often this occurs, I've had an opportunity to attend one, where you may have standards of conduct complaints filed by members of unions against their union. So there's several different types of disputes that the Public Employee Relations Board is responsible for resolving in the labor context.
All right, I'm very clear that you both understand primarily what your function will be, and thank you for that. As a follow-up, how do you ensure impartiality and fairness when dissolving or resolving a dispute? We have personalities in government, as we have in the general population, that have learned the tricks of the trade as far as making it clear that their position should prevail. So, and I've heard you talk about, each of you speak about impartiality, truth and justice, etc. So how do you feel about that? Because you might be in a very hot, difficult spot.
Maybe I'll start.
All right,
Sure.
Mr. Barnes.
And, I thought a lot about this question, and thank you for the question. My experience in the past in the government is as well as outside the government, that it's important to, first of all, look at the facts. And be, as I mentioned in my testimony, to really uphold confidentiality so that you can build trust on both sides of the aisle, and particularly as it relates to some of the outcomes that might occur if people lose their position or income. I mean, you want to make sure that you're looking at all of the factors that are involved in making a critical decision and advising the Office of Employee Appeals what we think is the best solution to resolve that issue. I build it on trust, confidentiality, and the ethics that support the rules. And that might sound a little academic, but it tends to work for me and then trying to get a sense of who the people are and what their issues are.
Mr. Clark.
Great question. I've been on both sides of cases. I've lost them and I've won them. And quite frankly, if the law isn't on my side, I'm going to lose. If the facts are not on my side, I'm going to lose. And there are cases where the law or the facts weren't on my side and I had to take the case anyway. You know, that said, the way you stay impartial is by looking at the facts, the law, and when you're looking at a collective bargaining agreement, well, what does the agreement say? And you basically interpret the agreement and you follow the collective bargaining agreement or you follow the law and you see if there's any existing precedent and you follow that. So it's very simple to stay impartial. You just follow the facts, follow the law. And that's what I'll do.
Can each of you sort of elaborate on a time when you had a difficult decision to make? Either, let's say, for you, Mr. Bonds, it'll be about an employee. For you, it'll be about a labor group. And kind of walk us through that. And I know these are very elementary questions, but I just want to give the public a sense of how you see your work and how you would move forward as a member of the board. Mr. Bonds, okay.
Okay, sure.
Okay with you?
Oh, absolutely.
One of the things that I realized as a longtime district resident, is this is a very small city. And the word spreads very quickly if you are trying to do something that's not according to the ethics of the case. I had an employee, without going into any detail, I hired, did my best to promote this employee. Employee, unfortunately, created a serious conflict. Really bothered me because I had invested so much time into this. But I realized that at the end of the day, you know, I had to look at all of the issues that were involved in this particular issue without going public, because I would never do that. But trying to get the general counsel to advise me as to how I should proceed, and also to look at the fairness issue about what the outcome would be for this particular tough decision for me. But going through that process enabled me to make a decision. That's kind of the rules that I would use moving forward. I'm a personable person, so that's important to me, what the personality is like. But I also am a strong believer in following the law and what the process is so that we can come very equitable, timely manner, so we have to drag it out forever and forever. That helps a little bit.
Yes, yes, it does. I always think of the Office of Employee Appeals as an opportunity for anyone in the government to really bring their grievance, their concerns. And you do need a fair amount of empathy, I'll say, because people come with many different kinds of complaints. As a council woman, I get constituent complaints, and some of them are from employees. And it's all very interesting, I'll say. But nevertheless, when people have an issue, they have an issue, and they really want to be heard. So I appreciate that sensitivity that you are expressing. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Clark, you got a bigger batch of people to deal with. You got a union. And as you said, a union warring another union primarily is what it boils down to.
In some instances, yes. My experience has basically been one where I have not been a neutral, which is what makes this position so attractive. I've represented labor or management. And in DC, I've primarily represented management. The process, I mean, having to represent management, there's not much of a process. I kind of have to take the cases I'm assigned, for lack of a better way to put it. But I can look back to when I was negotiating on behalf of unions, and you have the employees that are seriously looking for an improvement in either compensation or working conditions, and you have a bargaining committee. And in that process, you have to work with the union members. I'm the spokesperson for them as the chief negotiator, but you have to work with them to try to come up with proposals and concepts for negotiation and for bargaining that will actually improve them, that are attainable. Like, I'll give you an example. In New York City, the city always gives the best deal if you're not if you're not one of the uniform services, a policeman, fireman, sanitation worker, or a teacher. Other than that, AFSCME, District Council 37 always gets the best deal. Everybody else falls in line. So I was representing a group of doctors in front of the MTA, and that year the city gave AFSCME a three-year contract, 3%, 3%, 3%, 9% total in increases. My folks wanted 24%. Yeah, exactly. The look there, you raise your eyebrow. I said, sure, I'll ask. I have no problem asking. I will pound the table. I will work with you, but they're probably not going to do that. So I asked, they caucused, they said, we're prepared to give you what the city gave AFSCME. And I said, thank you, we'll caucus. And I said, see, now what do we really want? And let's talk about trying to, you said you wanted to improve your ability to go out of network for healthcare. You wanted to get additional leave for bereavement leave, things of that nature. I said, let's try to get that. And ultimately, we were very successful in obtaining those things for them. So I try to work collaboratively with individuals in that context. And I think that's probably how the board is going to look at its decisions. I know they collaborate. Now, that does mean that if I disagree, I mean, I guess I would have the ability to write a dissenting opinion if I disagree. But the goal is to try to find common ground to reach a decision that is fair and equitable.
All right, so then I have to follow up and ask, how do you feel about being in a situation where you disagree? You've got these two groups and you really disagree with what is being said, what is being presented to you by the group that you thought you were representing, and you're hearing from the other union that says they didn't do it fairly. And I'm here on appeal because the last negotiator or arbitrator that I met with um, didn't treat us fair. So we want you to hear this. How are you? I mean, this is the real work that may happen.
Yeah,
I've heard, yes.
I've been in front of PERB. I would say that you don't necessarily see two unions going against each other on a regular basis. It's more the agencies going against, the union would be filing a complaint against the agency
Okay.
as a rule.
Yeah.
And in that instance, that's why I said being a neutral is a different context, because I don't necessarily have to deal with two unions fighting against each other. The question is, did management implement something, just using as an example, without giving the union notice and an opportunity to bargain, where notice and an opportunity to bargain was required? So we're looking at things of that nature. Does a proposal excessively interfere with management's rights as provided for under the Comprehensive Merit Personnel Act? So you have to look at the language of the particular proposals to see whether it's either an appropriate arrangement, which would be negotiable, or whether it does interfere with management's rights and therefore would be non-negotiable. So
I appreciate that. I was really beginning to speak on a specific situation that we had a few months ago, where two unions vying for the right to represent an agency. The office made a determination that you must hold an election in a certain way, and they did. And then when the outcome occurred, there was some question about, from the opposing.
Right, for the union that lost
Yes,
the
yeah,
election.
yes. And so then, the office said, okay, we'll just redo it since you're complaining.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'm just, and they redid it,
Okay.
same results, so things are pretty much settled down, but you might see them again, it's, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I honestly, I figured DC is a very labor-centric city. So I've thought to a certain degree that the representation of employees at different agencies has been somewhat settled, but conceivably, if a union is not performing in a manner that people would appreciate, or if it's a new agency or a new group that they're able to organize, then you might have competition for the purposes of representing those employees. Uh, but I haven't seen too many decertifications of unions in the DC government
Yeah.
with respect to that. So there hasn't been a lot of changeover. But yes, if you've got something new, that is a possibility that could occur. I would say that I'm not sure I would just do it because someone's complaining. But that said, you have to make sure that the elections run fairly.
Mhm.
And if both unions have had an opportunity to make their pitch to the employees and the employees selected their exclusive representative for collective bargaining, I would say that's it. Sometimes, the challenge is being able to just reach that decision, and it's accepting the fact that you may have lost an election.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to highlight that because you may run into that, through the, organization that you would be a board member for. What do you consider your top priority for your tenure on the board, and how would you go about accomplishing that? Yes, Mr. Barnes.
Okie dokie. First thing I would do is look at the statutes and all of the rules and regulations that are governing this process at the Office of Employee Appeal. Talk to and get to know the general counsel and the staff of the office to get a good background, and then try to determine what are the priority issues that are pending, and submerge myself, if you will, into the pros and cons of what's happening, and then try to work in an efficient manner so that we can reach some kind of consensus and a decision so that we can resolve those issues. There are probably some best practices that we need to look at and follow, and I would try to make sure that we are implementing those best practices, and if not, to try to find out what other practices we might consider to improve our process, whether it's streamlining it, but basically at the end of the day, to make a decision in a timely manner that's fair to both sides. And that's kind of how I would start out, to really understand what the internal process is, learn from the past, and then make recommendations, improve the process moving forward.
Well, one of the, processes that we do have in place as a government is, allows a manager to, place an employee on, let's say, up to 10 days of sort of suspension. Um, the employee will say, I did nothing wrong, perhaps. Or they may say, I was horrible and I know I did this, or I was abusive in some manner, abused the laws of the government. The manager will say, it's my prerogative to find a way to, have justice, so to speak. Um, and that kind of measure may come before this government, and they may look anew. We're going to have a new administration, as you well know, and so it might bring about a new, ideology. So just wondered what your thoughts are about how you might handle that kind of situation if it were before your body to take a look at it or to implement it differently?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because these are times of changes, and I do expect that we'll have some changes in the way the government works. But again, I would not look at it in isolation. I would look at it in a collaborative method to see what the other members of the board feel about the issue, to talk again to the not only the managers, but also the general counsel and the head of that office, to trying to determine what's coming down the pipe and how we should best respond to that. Because at the end of the day, we want to maintain efficiency but fairness. And so that might sound kind of Pollyannish, but I think it's important to include other members of the board and staff to determine what changes, if any, a new administration might have for us so that we can be prepared for those changes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Clark, do you have an opinion?
Yes, I mean, I do believe that a new administration may have an approach as to how they want to effectuate and provide services and deal with employees in the district. Our job is to make sure that the law is still followed. So even if, let's just say the employer wants to take a more management rights approach or a more traditional approach to labor relations as opposed to a collaborative approach, that may impact the relationship that the agencies will have with the employees. We just have to make sure that in that change that they're still following the obligations of the Comprehensive Merit Personnel Act.
I certainly appreciate hearing from you all. Have you met with any of the staff or other board members?
I have not.
Have not.
I've met the executive director.
All right, okay. So how do you intend on remaining current on labor law and matters of employee and management relations? Are
Well,
you thinking about it from a formal perspective? I know as an attorney, you probably have some requirements.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Would you like my response as well?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
sure,
certainly.
sure. So I would, again, sort of self-immersion to get into and read all of the background information of the major issues that are affecting. I would talk to some of the current and former board members. Arrington Dixon, for example, is one of my colleagues from Ward 8, and I'd be happy to seek advice from him. Sarah Abbott, my mother-in-law, served on the and I would, try to find out as much as I can so that I'm prepared to move the process forward, equitable. And again, I keep saying timely because I don't like to see things back up if we don't have to. I want to keep it moving. A lot of issues out there.
Do either one of you or both of you see your role in trying to, as you mentioned, Mr. Barnes, move matters along? One of the complaints that this committee has received is that both of these agencies sometimes take a while.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, a couple of years ago, we actually had a sort of like a clocker, how many days did it take to get to this level of understanding or decision making? So what do you feel you can do as a member of the board to move things along?
Well, I would think one of the things we have to do is to have a pretty good understanding what the bottlenecks are, and then begin to sort of chip away bottlenecks so that we can move the process forward. A lot of opinions and some facts about what's not moving these processes forward. I would really try to dig deep into that area and see what I remember as a sort of side, my old pastor used to say, sometimes you have to obstacles into opportunities, stumbling blocks into stepping stones. So that method is one that tends to work. And so we'd have to find out what's holding up this process and solve those issues so that we can.
When I worked with DC WASA, I left approximately 60 cases before I moved on to the federal government I had filed answers in that was set for hearing for PERB at some point. So yeah, I have an idea about the background.
They are not there waiting for you.
I hope not either, because that's 20 years ago. That'd be a fair amount of things I'd have to recuse myself from.
Okay.
Uh, I would like to believe that we could handle the cases in an effective and efficient way. I mean, I'm not sure if the backup is based on getting the matters heard or after they're heard, then getting the decision rendered. So I think I need to figure out where the backup is and then see how the board can facilitate the PERB staff in getting cases processed quicker or us rendering decisions, like I said, sound legal decisions in a timely manner.
I now have a series of questions that are general that we ask all our candidates. Do you or any member of your immediate family have any interest, financial or otherwise, that may directly or indirectly pose a conflict of interest for you in the performance of your duties? Mr. Bonds?
No.
All right. And Mr. Clark?
No.
All right, thank you. Have you ever been investigated, disciplined, or cited for a breach of ethics for unprofessional conduct by or been subject of a complaint to any court, administrative agency, professional association, disciplinary committee, or other professional group?
No.
No.
All right. Well, that concludes our examination of you gentlemen. I appreciate it very, very much. And you will be hearing from the Office of Talent, I presume, am I correct? Yes, okay, yes. Thank you so very much.
Thank
Very
you.
very nice to meet you and nice to see you again, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much for being here today. So that concludes our examination of the Public Employee Relations Board and the Office of Employee Appeals nominations. That is our talk with Mr. Lee and Mr. Bonds, and we thank them again for their time today. And we now will transition to the two nominations for the Board of Elections. The District of Columbia Board of Elections is the independent agency of the district government responsible for the administration of elections, ballot access, and voter registration. The board works to enfranchise eligible residents, conduct our elections, and assure the integrity of the electoral process. It consists of 3 active board members, an executive director, a general counsel, and support staff who run the day-to-day operations of the agency. And so we are going to ask Mr. Gregory McCarthy to come forward and Mr. Michael Wakefield also to come forward. These are our nominees for the board. Mr. McCarthy is a Ward 2 resident, a graduate in the Foreign Service from Georgetown University. He has extensive experience in public service, having previously worked in the mayor's office, the U.S. Congress, and the Office of Management and Budget, and the White House. He also served on several boards and commissions, including the Tax Revision Commission here in the district and the Board of Trustees of a public library. He is currently the Vice President of Community Engagement for the Washington Nationals Baseball Club. and he serves on the board of Capitol Riverfront Business Improvement District. And he's been recognized by the council previously as one of the few people who has run marathons in all 7 continents. Okay, welcome here. And we also have with us Mr. Michael Wakefield. He is a Ward 5 resident and he's a graduate of the University of Virginia and the University of Virginia School of Law. He has served on the Senate Appropriations Committee in Congress and worked on the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Armed Services and the Committee on Veterans Affairs. He is also a veteran from with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where he completed the Military Honors Program. And he currently works as an attorney at Holland and Knight, focusing on public policy and regulations. So at this time, if you will raise your right hand, we'll swear you in. Do you swear and affirm that the statements you make before us today to be complete and truthful? Thank you very much. And so we will start with you. Mr. McCarthy, we'll take your statement.
Good
you.
afternoon, Chairman Bonds. Indeed, I'm Gregory McCarthy, and I'm honored to be nominated to serve on the Board of Elections by the mayor. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you today and talk about my possible confirmation. Public service is one of the guiding principles of my life, and I've been privileged to serve, as you noted, in a lot of capacities in and out of government. Perhaps most notably, I worked in the administration of Mayor Anthony Williams for 7 years. I note alongside with you for almost all that time. I work daily with the city council, and that remains a source of great pride and sentimentality for me. I've served on an array of public and private boards, including regulatory, advocacy, governing, and constituency representation modes. I currently serve, as you noted, on the board of the Navy Yard Business Improvement District. They've actually changed their name since I wrote that statement. It's now back to being the Navy Yard Business Improvement District. And I'm currently the chair of the board of Statehood Research DC. Previously, I was chair of the board of DC Action, which focuses on child and youth development. I was also chairman of the board of Destination DC, which, as you know, is our convention and visitors bureau. And as you noted, more recently, I was president of the board of trustees of the DC Public Library for 6 years. Previously, I served 2 terms on the Historic Preservation Review Board, to which I was appointed by Mayors Dixon and Barry. That shows you how long I've been around. Collectively, this service shows that I have a proper understanding of the roles of boards, including adherence to governing statutes and rules of procedure, healthy board-staff relationships, the importance of public input, and respects for various points of view. I've drawn some lessons from this service, which I'll share with you today, that I think would be applied if I were to serve on the Board of Elections. First of all, process is everything. It's absolutely essential for boards to adhere to established process and rules and maintain such integrity. If they don't, the outcomes that they're in charge of could be degraded. It's important to get it right the first time. It's often unwise to rush a decision or a process until all the necessary or even desirable information or analysis is available. Never underestimate public dialogue. It's been my experience that so-called ordinary citizens can often have the most extraordinary advice and counsel ever, and they always make the process better. Sometimes board members' personal opinion is irrelevant, and it's really important to separate when you need to your personal opinion on an issue versus the role that you're supposed to actually have and implement as a board member. Consensus and compromise are often desirable, but not always. Informed and judicious actions by boards are bound to disappoint one or more parties, and board members are going to have to be comfortable with that. And popularity is nice, but it can be irrelevant to getting the job done. And board members must act in accordance with laws and procedures, regardless of whether those are going to result in disappointment, anger, or even scorn by people. If I were to serve on the Board of Elections, given all my previous affiliations and relationships thereof, I would be wholeheartedly commit to you to being fair, impartial, and independent. I would act with regard to all these previous affiliations. I have a copy of DCMR Title III. It's about 500 pages long. I'm beginning to get into it, and I will familiarize myself with the rules and regulations affecting voting, campaign finance, and elections. I think as the board gets into the work later this year, it'll certainly want to look at the experience of ranked choice voting and do a postmortem on that and see what can be done, if anything, better. Same is true for the referendum process and the fair elections law. I know that the elected leaders have talked about making changes there too, and that's be something that the board would definitely want to weigh in on. I would also be resolute on making certain the board has adequate resources, including funding and staffing, to get the job done. Next year, there are going to be 2 special elections, as you know, for this body. And it's important that the board and the staff have the resources and people to get that done. Our city has limited democracy. It's very important, therefore, that democracy that we do have be done with perfection and dignity. And what I've learned over time, as people in this town sometimes attack our prerogatives and our right to self-determination, the best way to defend it is to do what we do perfectly and not create any controversy. And I would certainly uphold those traditions if I were to serve on the Board of Elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. Mr. Wakefield, we'll take your statement now.
Good
you.
afternoon, Chairman, Chairperson Bonds, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come and testify today and for your consideration for my nomination to serve on the Board of Elections. I'd also like to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to Mayor Bowser for her nomination and for the opportunity to serve the district. Please allow me to share just a little bit about myself and highlight some of my relevant background for this position. Although I'm now a partner at a large law firm here in DC, I've spent most of my career in public service. After graduating law school, the University of Virginia, I began my legal career 15 years ago here in DC as an active duty Army judge advocate, as you noted. Serving my nation in uniform more than a decade ago remains one of the highlights of my career. And in addition to my regular legal duties and day job, I also had the honor of being selected by the Army to serve as a White House social aide at the White House during the Obama administration. I then spent the next 10 years of my career as a staff member on Capitol Hill, working for both members of the U.S. House and Senate, as well as professional staff for the Senate Appropriations Committee. I have a profound respect for bodies like this one, as well as for anyone who's willing to undertake the daunting task of running for public office in an election and then working hard to go on and serve those constituents. I also know how hard the staff or committees and elected members work to ensure roundtables like this one are a success, so I'd be remiss not to also thank the various members of the staff for the important role that they play in this process and in the work of the DC City Council and the Board of Elections more broadly. During my time on the Hill, I learned the importance of building trust and credibility with others across the political spectrum and of working collaboratively in a bipartisan or nonpartisan way to accomplish a shared set of goals. In elections, trust and credibility are fundamental, just as elections themselves are fundamental to our democratic system. Getting our elections right is what in the Army one might call a no-fail mission. In short, I would be honored to serve on the Board of Elections in order to continue to be of service to the community in an area I care deeply about and one that I believe is of critical importance. There are many examples of this important nonpartisan or bipartisan work ethic I learned on the Hill or in the Army that I might highlight with regards to negotiating important national security issues, negotiating large swaths of the federal budget. But I'd like to briefly highlight one important example and legislative achievement relevant to the conduct of our elections. In December of 2022, the Electoral Count Reform Act was enacted into law. It modernized the archaic 1887 Electoral Count Act, which is the process in which Congress uses to count electoral votes submitted every 4 years by the District of Columbia and each of the various states. I'm proud to have helped support a group of 15 ideologically diverse senators, some quite progressive and some quite conservative, in their politically sensitive negotiations to ensure that the electoral votes tallied by Congress accurately reflected each state's vote for president and vice president. That hard-fought compromise legislation ultimately garnered 39 Senate co-sponsors to include both the Senate majority and minority leaders. While the recently modernized Electoral Count Act largely deals with the very last steps of the process of certifying and electing a president and vice president at the federal level, I've also learned a great deal about the conduct of elections at the state and local level during my time on the Hill. I spent time speaking with election officials about the challenges they faced, including securing their elections and protecting their election workers. I sought guidance from commissioners of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission about best practices and the EAC's voting system guidelines. I also conferred with election law experts and practitioners about various legal considerations relevant to the conduct of elections. I've also learned quite a bit observing our elections on the ground level. I've volunteered my time observing polling locations or tabulation centers at jurisdictions across the country, watching an array of different laws and regulations put into practice in the real world on the ground. I'm grateful so many ordinary Americans are willing to take up temporary duties as election workers every year and ensure a transparent and fair process, often working late into the early hours the day after the election. If confirmed, I would work with fellow board members and professional staff to ensure that the board functions efficiently, collaboratively, and fairly, and within the bounds of the law that governs the board's activities. Many matters will require the board's ongoing focus. For example, the district recently adopted a somewhat novel ranked choice voting system, which for the first time was used in the June primaries. Regular voter education and administrative attention will be necessary to ensure this change operates smoothly and without confusion. The board must also work to ensure the 2026 general election in November is a success, from ensuring sufficient election staff, ready and secure election equipment, and rapid action on other election administration or enforcement matters as they might arise. I stand ready to help ensure open, fair, and honest elections in the District of Columbia. Thank you, Chairperson Bonds, for the opportunity to testify before the committee today, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you both very much for your testimony. I'll just start with a few general thoughts. I think you pretty much covered the thoughts about professional, maybe even personal experiences that you have that would inform us about your work on the board. Is there anything in your history, your work history, that would give us a sense of how you would approach your job on the board in deliberating some of the issues? And that would require, of course, that you would know something about the kinds of issues that have come before the community. I know that Mr. McCarthy is familiar with some of these, having worked in local government, if for no other reason. But when I think about your record, being in Congress, kind of lofty, away from us at the local level, but just was curious as to what you might think about that.
Well, thank you for the question, Chairperson Bonds. Yeah, in my time, both now and then, my prior career in the Army and then in Congress as well, you were very frequently presented with a new set of law or a new set of facts and circumstances, and you have to learn a lot pretty quick. Now, I do think there's quite a bit I do know about election law and the conduct of elections in DC, and there's certainly a whole lot more that I do not know. And I think, how I would approach that on the board, as well as how I've approached it in the past, is to do the homework, know what I don't know and seek counsel when I need to, whether it's from the excellent staff on the board or elsewhere. And then, make a reasoned legal determination based on the law and the facts, in collaboration with the other members of the board.
Chairperson Bonds, I recall sometime in the 1990s when I was serving on the Historic Preservation Review Board, we had a case before us that was basically about constructing the new sports arena in Gallery Place. I was supportive of it, certainly wanted it to happen. And when we came time for the testimony, the mayor himself, Marion Barry, came to our hearing. As you know, he owned whatever room he was in, right? I was his appointee, and I had to rule whether G Street between 7th and 9th Streets was going to be adversely affected by this project, as it was an historic resource as defined in the L'Enfant Plan. So I certainly wanted this project to happen. There were other ways to argue it through special merit, and I certainly did not want to disappoint Marion S. Barry. But I knew that the way I had to interpret the law, I could only conclude that, yes, indeed, the closure of G Street was the deleterious effect on the L'Enfant Plan. And so I had to vote that way against my personal opinion and also the desires of Mayor Barry. He successfully came back and argued the special merit case, and as we know, we enjoy the arena today. But that was one instance when I had to vote the way I thought was right rather than the way I really wanted to.
Thank you very much for that. That's a great example. It kind of remember some of those days. Of course, I was in diapers then, remember? Yes, yes, of course. So how do you envision your role on the Board of Elections? I know that technically they meet usually once a month. Um, does that mean you hurry in for a 10 o'clock meeting and you're out of there at 1 o'clock and they'll ring you up or send you a text to say when the next meeting is? Or do you see yourself being more engaged in setting the agendas? Because this is the board meeting, this is your meeting. So I'm curious as to how you see.
I would start off by saying I recognize that the board is served by a very competent staff, and I would rely on the staff for information and guidance. But at the end of the day, what happens is the three members' responsibility. So I would think that I would be engaging with the staff and the course throughout the month, setting goals and priorities with my colleagues, telling them what was expected, hearing their input, hearing their analysis, hearing their recommendations. But at the end of the day, us three collectively making the right decisions. And what I would want to see is that we have an election system that is open and accessible to all voters. And so I would want to look at, are people voting? And if they aren't, why not? And is there anything we can do to improve that? And of course, occasionally the board does have to adjudicate certain disputes or challenges. That's a heavy role. But we should also look at education such that those instances of imperfections or breakings of the rule are as little as possible. Are candidates and campaigns so well informed about our systems? Are they so easy to comply that those that are out of compliance can be reduced as much as possible? So I would see, yes, the public meetings being just that. And of course, all decisions would be made in public on the record. But I would see a lot of dialogue with the staff about setting goals and agendas. Yes.
How
Yeah,
about
and-
you, Mr. Wakefield?
Yeah, thank you. I've spent quite a bit of my career preparing for hearings. And, for my part, there's certainly a regular agenda that would come up, the rulemaking agenda, the enforcement agenda, other updates that the board deals with every week. I would certainly want to spend a lot of time reviewing those materials in advance and preparing questions for the staff in advance to potentially address at the hearing. But then also set some agenda items and address some priorities. And I think the first priority of the board right now should be getting ready for the election we have in 5 or 6 months coming up in November. Whether that's ensuring the basic election administration stuff about voter rolls and ballot access, but also dealing with, again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the first general election we'll have with the new ranked choice voting system to ensure that voters understand what the ballot's going to look like before they walk in the door or walk into a polling place on election day.
Kind of opened this door. I don't know if you realized it, but the door that's open now is we can talk about what else may be in the minds of the voters. On Tuesday, the council passed the provision for the semi-open primary, and some voters they see that this is an opportunity for them, if you're an independent or a nonpartisan registrant, to participate. Have you given any thought as to how we can inform the public that it's not this election, but it's subsequent elections starting in 2028 is my understanding? Or do you have a different understanding?
I don't have a different understanding. And indeed, that's something that the elected leadership puts into law and then funds. And it's the board's role to implement it without regard to our own opinion on the topic, of course. But, grassroots education is absolutely critical. I've seen bus ads, I've seen radio ads. I've seen, lots of visitation by Board of Election officials to community associations. That's all good, but that's going to have to evolve over 4 or 5 years to really sink in and have the kind of impact that we want. So it might be inevitable, unfortunately, for the first couple of elections where there's some modicum of, gee, what does this mean when we get, but I would want to see data about how people are voting, how many people, for example, showed up at the election where they could vote in an open primary? Was it different from the last time? And let the numbers and the facts lead us to conclude whether we're doing a good job or not.
I,
Thank you.
Councilmember, I did see I think it was the 1 million or maybe 1.1 million in the recent budget to implement the rest of Initiative 83. Certainly something the council, the board rather, is going to have to spend some time in the near future on to ensure that process ends up going smoothly down the line after the general election. I do think it's going to take some voter education for people to understand what's happening and how it's being implemented, the things they can and can't do as part of that process, based on some of these rulemakings that could take the form of some of the mailers and flyers that Mr. McCarthy mentioned. I suspect the parties and others are going to have their piece outside of the board's purview, where they're going to educate folks as well. But it's something we have to keep our eye on to make sure, again, because you have ranked choice now and you have the open primaries piece, relatively big changes to how elections are conducted here. And it's going to be somewhat confusing on the front end here for folks. And we want to make sure that we can avoid as much trouble as we can.
So then, you're very strong in reminding us of ranked choice voting. And some of the information that we have received thus far is the standard information. The turnout per polling location, as I call it. I think they call it vote centers now. And that's standard. But to get to the nitty gritty as to whether or not public is accepting or has been informed well enough about ranked choice voting so that they use it, seems to me we would want that kind of data also. That would be very helpful. For instance, 150,000 voted in the primary. So how many of those were individuals who voted just for the first category, first choice?
Yeah.
How many did a second or a third or a fifth choice? We don't know. And I think in order to understand ranked choice voting, we need that kind of information. So what do you see the board looking at the new way in which we vote as an opportunity to provide additional information to the public?
I personally would be very interested in knowing the statistics of the election we just had in terms of ballot exhaustion, meaning folks aren't filling out all the new boxes they see on the ranked choice ballot. I'd like to see some data, if we're able to get it, on the number of ballots that were filled out incorrectly because maybe there's
Yes.
confusion, as they got to the voting center. So I think that would be important to help drive the board's efforts towards voter education to address whatever problems there might be. And certainly in some cases, a voter might just decide not to fill out other choices, and that's,
Yes.
they're entitled to do that as well. But I think you hit the nail on the head with respect to gleaning as much data and information as we can to help inform the board's work and making elections work more smoothly in the future.
Okay. And as a board member, do you anticipate that citizen groups, ANCs or civic associations, or just neighbors or individual should petition the board to provide that kind of information? Or do you see this as just the general work of the board staff to, I'm just using this as an example, the board staff to just pull out that information and make it available? I'm just trying to understand how you see an agenda for the board to work on materializing. Is it something that happens internally, organically, or is it something that citizens have to ask for in order to get?
Certainly my take on that, Chairperson Bonds, is that is very important, useful data for the board to have on their own volition. Whether that's possible, based on the sort of data that's collected as the machines are running the ballots. I'm uncertain. Maybe that's something we could talk about addressing. But I would like, that's the kind of data that I think is
Yeah.
important and would help the board function better.
Yeah. As this committee having oversight of Board of Elections, I'm very interested in it as well. So I'm not trying to step, but I'm trying to understand how the board sees itself operating in this medium, because I think it's very important.
I think, any information that we have, unless it's proprietary, it ought to be shared with the public. It ought to be shared with them, though, in a thoughtful manner. So one thing I would recommend the board does at one point is have the data shared, but with it, an analysis informed by the staff and our own judgment at the end about what happened, what went right, what went wrong, what could be done better. And, one thing I would think we should think about is just a standard poll. And have a polling company just ask people, did you rank choice? And if you did not, was it because you were confused? Was it because you were strategic in how you were voting because you didn't want to? Every year when we elect the two at-large people, there's always a large undervote for the non-majority party person. And we really don't know whether that's because people don't understand they can vote for two, or they only want to vote for the party with which they're affiliated. Well, we won't really know until we have some type of a scientific sampling. But I would definitely share that with the public, but not in raw data, but as part of a broader official analysis that the board adopted.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I am very interested in how we report outcomes of elections to the public, and I'm most interested in how the public impacts our voting process. I think they both they're dually important, and that we're small enough jurisdiction that we can have that to be the call of the day. So just sort of exploring. You all have answered so many of these already, so I'm just quickly reading through to make sure. Have you previously followed any of the meetings of the board? Or have you been that curious and that relaxed and not busy so that you could? There you go.
I have not watched live any of the meetings of the board. I have gone through and reviewed recent board, these are publicly posted board minutes, and in some cases transcripts of the meetings to get a feel for how they go and the business is conducted.
Agree.
Probably 30 years ago, when I was affiliated with a campaign, I attended several meetings, and since my nomination, I've watched the last two meetings online.
All right, thank you so much. Are there areas where you think the role of the board could be strengthened that you haven't already spoken to?
I said earlier that you should never have an opinion till you have all the facts before you, so I'm going to break that rule already. But one of the things I would like to just discuss is, when the council is considering changes to the underlying laws about referendum or fair elections, whether the board itself should weigh in a public setting at a hearing, say, and have an opinion. Obviously, we would administer whatever it is the electeds pass and fund. That's without question. But I would be interested to know what the previous practice has been about the board weighing in as an institution or as individuals in that capacity. So I might look at that as a way that the board could lend its expertise to the system a little bit more forthrightly.
Yeah, and I think it's tricky because the role of the board, it's administrative in nature. We're not a policymaking body. I think the role of the board is to implement the laws put in place by the elected members of this council. So it's another way of saying we can't lean too far into making policy, but certainly I think we can serve in a sort of advisory or consulting role as members of the board see issues with our elections and how the city council or others might be of assistance.
Yes, well, I know that this committee tries to do that with oversight. We're not always as successful as we'd like to be, or any committee isn't. But that is the exchange point in the past, but I do recognize that there's room for more input and more collaboration, I think, so that we get a product that is usable. Um, I don't have to hide this fact, but so many people who did come out um, in the primary came out knowing and saying they were still confused. And so, how do we embrace that and how do we go forward? I mean, is there more transparency that will solve the problem? And how do we do the transparency? Because I think you make a fair point that sometimes it's about doing a procedure process that you get the hang of it and what have you. And the board has, I know on many occasions, had the equipment out for people to learn how to use it, but that wasn't the issue. Everyone knows how to check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That wasn't the issue. The issue is, so now if I check 3, what happens to my vote? How are you going to tally it up? And so trying to help people understand how and what that meant was a really, and then the board did not really venture into that because for many it's considered policy, but the voters wanted to know before they cast their vote, or when they came to cast their vote, they wanted someone to guide them through the process, as if they could get an answer. So I'm just giving you comments that we have earnestly received from the public.
I would just add to that, Chairperson Bonds, in the course of all the public debate about whether to implement ranked choice voting, one thing that didn't sit right with me was the assertion that our voters wouldn't understand. And I thought that was not accurate. We have the most sophisticated and intelligent voters in this country, probably just by the very nature of our complex government that's unlike any other. And so I always push back on that. I said, no, our people can definitely understand what this. It's just a matter of the timing and the nature in which they learn, but never underestimate their ability to master this. And I think what happened in that whole thing is they conflated two somewhat distinct things. One was, how will the board calculate my votes versus what am I supposed to do with the ballot?
Yeah.
And sometimes that conversation got merged. And I think that is confusing. I must admit, when I was trying to think through various scenarios about how ranked choice would unfold if I did this and the fourth person didn't do that, the third person, and I thought, actually, I don't have to actually know that when I fill out the ballot. I just have to have confidence that it will be done fairly and accurately. And over time, I think our voters will get there, but I never underestimate their ability to understand and be very sophisticated.
Yes. No, I think you're correct. It is about what we learned when people were saying, what does this mean? How does this work? You drill down and ultimately they're really saying, okay, so how is it going to be tallied?
Exactly.
You know, and if I do this, will it give that other candidate an advantage? If I do that, will it give that candidate an advantage? So that's what we were running into. And I don't know how we can help the public to digest that because the tallying is mechanical, it's in the system. So, but anyway, I just was curious if you had some thoughts on that, because that's a new way of voting in the District of Columbia henceforth and for all of our elections. We're I think the only jurisdiction out of 4 or 5 that use ranked choice voting that do it for every contest. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you about that. On the role of the board to oversee voter registration, what do you see the future of voter registration in the District of Columbia? Because currently, if you get identification, your license or non-driver's license, you are automatically enrolled as a voter in the District of Columbia. And that information leaves the DMV and it comes to the Board of Elections automatically. So is there something else you think we could be doing? Because there are people who maybe who are here who do not have an ID, or people who are here, the ID is expired, or folk who aren't sure they want to live here long term, but we should be maybe encouraging them to up our registration numbers. I don't know. Do you have some thoughts about voter registration?
I- Maybe I'll lead on this one, Chairperson Bonds. You know, I think DC is somewhat challenged here because it's such a transient place, lots of people moving in and out every year. You know, I think at the end of the day, on the registration side, you know, we do have same day voter registration. So, you know, folks can register if they're not registered already at the polling places or at the voting centers. But I do think it's just going to require consistent voter education efforts in terms of making sure that they know what they're eligible to get, whether it's some form of identification or whether it's just ensuring that they're registered to vote if they don't go to the DMV or don't have a license.
I think it's worth noting, I think we have a very, as you said, permissive and broad voter registration system, which is what the electors have decided. And it's worked out well. I think our system, by and large, works very, very well. I would say that what I've noticed is what confuses people is when they move within the city and the ballots are mailed. And I wonder whether there's a way of all the government data that we have from driver's licenses and tax records, and when you call 311, whether there's a way to automatically update that. So when you call one government agency to say, I'm moving, or I required, you know, I'm asking for a no parking zone outside my house to move, somebody can ask you, well, where are you moving then? Let's update your voter registration at the same time. So there are lots of ways to have all the various government collection agencies of information make certain that the voter rolls are as accurate as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that that is important. That is one of the concerns people have expressed. You know, I think even some of my staff would say, oh, I received 2 or 3, you know, ballots, and they're for other people, but they're there. Or I actually received 3 of my own because I did a change of address and they came, but they had the old address. So, you know, it does happen. And I think that's something that that the board, you would be looking at. A big area is, this is a big bite that the Board of Elections has before it. And even today, if you've been watching the various hearings, these initiatives, and we have become the playground of Initiative America. And we have, when I say the playground, we actually have individuals, 1 or 2 individuals primarily, and that can amass a team to collect as many signatures as needed. If we said you needed 1 million, they probably could do that as well. But seriously, they collect the signatures. They pay for the signatures that are collected, and they can get almost any measure on the ballot through that process. And it seems unfair because ultimately, like the initiative for Initiative 8083, as we call it, I-83. I don't think anyone in the District of Columbia would say no to a title that says, make every vote count. We all believe make every vote count. And so that has been the process. And it can be very costly, and it really has the initiative process determining how we spend tax dollars. Now, some will say that the public has as much right to make that decision as an elected official. But in a democratic process of our government, it says you elect these individuals who represent you collectively. So I'm just trying to understand what your thoughts might be on initiatives and what have you. I maybe gave you a poor example, but trying to give you the,
Well, thanks, Chairperson. There's a process in the DC code, as you know, where the board is supposed to evaluate I forget the exact words, legal sufficiency, I think, for whether and
Yes.
how a voter initiative appears on a ballot, whether it has access to a ballot. So there are some rules of the road there that the board has to follow. But I will say to your broader point about what does the ballot say? I mean, I do think voters are entitled to understand what they're voting on, and what the impact of the referendum would be. So I do think it's important for the board as they're looking at these things for basic legal sufficiency, to ensure that, again, voters understand what they're voting on.
I would just add, as we said before, obviously the parameters for what it can be put on a ballot and how is something that the elected leaders in this body set. And I wouldn't ever have used my own discretion to limit that. Nevertheless, I do think it is in the board members to use common sense and discretion to say, is this too much? Sometimes voters can have fatigue, and putting everything before them, even if it is statutorily permitted, may not be in the best service of having a voting experience. And we should use our own discretion to ensure that what voters are seeing is not too plentiful, it's got the right context, and it's understandable. And I would like to look at that more closely as a board member, and would look to the elected leaders actually to set the laws to reflect what they collectively think is the right thing, and then we could act from there.
thank you very much. You also have the Office of Campaign Finance. And the Office of Campaign Finance is most recently found that the elections have used fair elections process. That is where 5-1 for contributions, and the contribution limits are set by the office that is you're aspiring to. And through the process, I don't know if did we exceed the 13 million thus far, but I think we've exceeded 10 million. We had 13 million in the budget for fair elections for this year. This year being election cycle and going into FY27. So we're very close to exceeding that. Over the last 2 election cycles, 3 with this, we've seen almost all of the candidates decide to use fair elections. So I think we had, okay. Yeah, we're currently at 10.5, and I think we had more than 58 candidates to use fair elections as a process. And we have some, just wondered if you have some thoughts about the fair elections process, because technically, if we get 5 or 6 more candidates signed up for the fair elections, depending on the office they sign up for, whether it's mayor, attorney general, what have you, where the large and chairman, largest pots of resources are available to them, we could easily exhaust the remains. So we would be out of money moving forward. So you might have to look at that at some point as the board, because campaign finance is also within your purview. Okay.
I would just add to that, once again, the parameters of the fair election law is something that this body would set, but data would inform it. I think there were, obviously a couple of intents when that came out. One was to limit the influence of large donors in the race. I think there are ways to look at that critically to see whether that's been successful or not. And then let's look at voter participation. If 58 candidates qualifying for fair election financing has resulted in the voting participation going up. That's a significant factor. If it's stable, I could draw another conclusion, but I would like to have the data to look at that.
Very good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I would just add, Councilmember, I'd have to review the underlying law, in terms of what happens if we run out of funding and what the board would need to do, whether it's, reduce funding for campaigns to make sure everybody's on an equal footing or what have you, or go to the city council for additional funding potentially. But it's something that you would want to be able to address in a way that is transparent and fair to everyone in advance of the election, because I just think it's
Yes.
important that everyone is treated fairly and transparently to have a credible process.
Yes, and then we also have the newest information or discussion about elections and um candidates being close to PACs and no limit on PACs involvement in candidates. So I'm just suggesting that you may have some new domains
Hmm.
to be concerned with and to deliberate on.
And Councilmember, there was a Supreme Court decision yesterday, which I have not had a chance
Yeah,
to
yeah.
review or certainly digest, but it had to do with coordination between political parties and
It
candidates.
does.
And I suspect that will require some board action in the not too distant future.
Yes, yes. I read it last night and I said, oh, this is something that I just want to, pique your interest in it because, whatever happens in this nation happens in the District of Columbia. We have learned, good or bad, we've learned that. That is for sure. So these are just basic questions I have to ask. Do you or any member of your immediate family have interest, financial or otherwise, that may directly or indirectly pose a conflict of interest for you in the performance of your duties? I know that you've completed your questionnaire, but I just want to put it on the record.
No.
No.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Have you ever received a written warning, been officially reprimanded, suspended, or disciplined for misconduct in the workplace?
No.
I unfortunately have to answer affirmatively, and I'll explain why. In 2001, when I was working in the mayor's office, several mayoral staffers, including myself, did receive a letter from Vega telling us that our efforts to incorporate the Millennium Corporation to celebrate the year 2000, which was an official EOM
Right.
practice, was, as it happens, an inappropriate action for us to do on government time. So I did receive a letter at that time from Vega advising me to cease doing that and not to do it again. That was 2001.
Okay, that was, what, 25 years ago?
Yes. But
Okay.
it made a big impression on me. I've never forgotten it. It's
I'm
an
sure.
intimidating thing to get that letter, no matter what the circumstances are.
I'm sure, I'm
Yeah.
sure. I'll just share, I got a similar inquiry from them because my Twitter account that I had for way before I joined the council, I was using. But it also posted, government announcements.
Hmm.
So I had to do a separation of the two. Didn't know that. So yes, Vega is always on the case, right?
That's their job.
For sure, for sure. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for your testimony today. Thank you very much. Members of the public who wish to submit any comments on these confirmations on the council hearing management system, or they may email it to seal@dccouncil.gov, and that's CEAL. The public record on this matter will remain open until Monday, July 6th at 12 noon. Thank you to those who have already submitted their testimonies, and it will be included in the record. The committee will reconvene for an additional meeting on Wednesday, July 8th, to mark up today's confirmations that will then be forwarded to the mayor's office and to the committee of the whole. This concludes today's public roundtable. I want to thank everyone who ventured with us today. Thank you so very much for your time and your attention to these matters. And I recognize the time is exactly 3 p.m., same day in which we started, the 1st of July, 2026. And with that, we are adjourned. And thank you to everyone and to my team as well.